My name's Ben Verghese. I'm Vice President of R&D at VMware, and I'm going to talk to you about what we're calling the Cloud Infrastructure Suite, and which relates to how we're taking vCenter and our set of management applications and in the process building an extensible platform. This is the second time I'm doing this talk in this VMworld, so I want to clear up one thing that came up as questions last time I did it. On the keynotes, we announced the vCloud Suite. That is, these two are related. That's more about how you can buy our products together in an easy way, a set of products. This is really about the technology underpinnings where we want to bring these products together in better and better ways. Some of it is in progress, some of it is forward-looking. So as I said, some of it is forward-looking, so this is the standard disclaimer. We need it from legal, and anything I say may be a figment of my imagination, bear no connection to products that VMware may ship, unless it's already shipped, then it's not. Okay, with that out of the way, it's, how many of you know when we shipped ESX 1.0? 2001? Yeah, good. vCenter was 2003, okay? That was a great application, vCenter. It's a management application. After that, we created a whole bunch more applications, SRM, more recently vCloud, a whole lot of them. We had an API. We have an API to vCenter on vSphere that allows you to operate most of the things that you can do. A big ecosystem's built around it, lots of applications and tools from third parties. But vCenter was never really a platform, a management platform, and we didn't quite have that sort of thing where everyone can integrate more deeply. We've done a few things in those places, but what we're going to talk about is really the evolution of where we are going. So it's a major transformation from the vCenter and a set of management applications to a platform and a suite of applications, right? So that's the core of what I'm going to talk about. There's sort of three parts to it. I'll talk about the key areas where we're building this integration for the suite of applications. Then I'll talk about some more about how this can be extended by both people, VMware and third parties. And finally, I'll walk through a mock example of what it will look like when it's all integrated, or part of what it will look like when it's all integrated. Most of you, if you've used our products, are familiar with the challenges today. We've used different products. There are multiple consoles that they do different things. Then there's not a set of shared services where you can say, can I see the tasks from everything all in one place? And you can't see that, or events and things like that. If you're programming to our APIs, there are multiple entry points. If you go to vCenter, there's an entry point. If you go to the vCloud API, it's a different one. If you're going to vShield, it's a different one. So we recognize, and the technologies, frankly, are different too. We recognize those challenges, and part of what we're trying to do here is, as we add solutions, it's hard for us to, and if you're a part of our partner in our ecosystem, it's hard for you to add solutions and extend. So that's what we are trying to address with this transformation. In terms of how we're going to build the suite, 4 core areas, and I'll go through each of them. The first one is the UI, and how do people interact with this. The second is about, I'm in the wrong order. The first one is how do we install and manage the life cycle of the software we're shipping to you. Today we have Update Manager that does essentially the software that goes on ESX, but we're starting to ship a lot more software. There's vCenter we shipped for a while and a bunch of other products. How do we manage that life cycle of all of our products? The second is about UI and usability. How do you present the user interface for the products? The third is about APIs and automation. And the fourth is a set of common services that underpin all of these. Okay, so I'll go through each of these in a little more detail. The ones that are closer to shipping, I'll have a little more detail in them. Okay, so the first is thinking about the life cycle, install, upgrade, patch, all of those parts. What we've had in the past is installers. We're doing two things. One, we're going to drive deeper into using virtual appliances. So we will start shipping new software. We've started it with vCenter. Some of our other software ships as virtual appliances. We're definitely going down the path of shipping virtual appliances and really lock down virtual appliances. Today, we're not there yet. The second is we're building a framework for installing all our products, whether they come as virtual appliances or as Windows binaries or Linux binaries. How do we install all of those products and manage that life cycle? So the idea is we'll have an underlying framework into which you'll have plugins that will go for each of the products that will do a few things. The plugins can probe your entire infrastructure and figure out what you have by way of hardware, what you have by way of installed software, the versions and things like that. So it builds a picture in its head around that. And then the next thing it does is it has the ability to obviously view what's available in terms of new software patches, those sorts of things with appropriate description. These are critical fixes. These are upgrades, those sorts of things. And then when you pick something and say, I want to move all my ESX hosts to 5.1, right? As soon as you do that, it understands the dependencies between products because that's part of the metadata that's provided there. So when you say it's 5.1, it will tell you, this is not supported with vCenter 4.1 or SRM 3.5 doesn't work with it. And you can sort of check all the things you want to do and you say, go ahead. It will make a plan which says, this is what I need to do to get you to where you want to go, right? Whether it's a critical fix or it's upgrade the entire infrastructure. And you then get the ability to schedule the plan, make it into sub-plans, schedule a part of it, pause, all of that. So that's the capability we want to deliver. And in addition to that, we will provide capability to manage the health of our software infrastructure, separate from what we provide today, which manage the health of your virtualized infrastructure. Since the things like vCenter and other applications are becoming business critical, we want to make sure that you can manage the health of the software infrastructure itself. So just quick idea of what some of this might look like. It's a centralized management of the installation. You'll see things like, here's all the stuff you have. You'll have an inventory of software too. And then here's a list of what's available. And you can get versions, or whether it's critical patch updates, you pick what you want. And then it will look something like this, where you'll see the order of things that have to happen. I've got to update all the hosts first, then I can update tools in the virtual machines, or there might be, I got to update vCenter first, so there may be a line for vCenter. And there'll be places where it will tell you that it's preparing to upgrade, and then here's the actual upgrade, and you can pause after the prepare and say, okay, good, you're prepared, now stop, and I'll do my upgrade when the window is open, those kinds of things. With? They're separate products. VMware Go is geared towards the SMB, so we're trying to be really simple and do everything for you. This is really a tool that will allow, again, we want to do everything for you, but we realize as an enterprise administrator, you want to have a lot more control over what happens and when. So those are the differences. We'll see some of this technology show up in Go probably some point. The same technology might show up with a different form factor. This is an idea of it, including things like taking care of maintenance mode where you need it and things like that. So it's basically, the goal is we will know everything about our infrastructure and we'll do it for you, whether it's around install, it's upgrade, patch, whatever. Okay, so the second area I want to talk about is UIs, right? What we have today in our products is per product UIs. You've got a vCenter UI, that's, it's great, it's wonderful. You've got vCloud that has a different UI, SRM is somewhat integrated, vShield is a different UI. Not a great situation. What we want to go towards, and this theme will filter into a bunch of things, is a roles-appropriate UI. So we'll have an administrator console, which is everything you need to do to sort of set up, configure, and get your, you set up your resources, configure them, and get them ready to be consumed. So that's where our initial focus is, on an administrator console into which all applications can provide their administrator functionality. So if I'm SRM and I have something for an administrator, I'll have a way to provide it in a consistent manner into there. And I'll show you a few more details. And then the other side is, I'll talk a little bit about what we will be providing for the consumer of things. So now that you've got your resources all set up, I'm now the consumer, I'm coming in, I just want to deploy a VM, I want to get some storage. That's a different style of UI for that. And I'll talk a little bit about that, but we're much further along on the admin UI. So the admin UI is based on, if some of you have seen it in a lab or on demos or in talks, what we are calling the new web client, and that's the underpinning of it. So it's essentially all the product functionality coming into a single pane of glass for the administrator. And it's built as we built a platform, right? A framework for a platform into which everything you had in vCenter moved over as plugins. So it was built day one as a platform with plugins, as opposed to, here's I built a UI for this, and now I'll let other things come in, right? So, and that's how we expect all our other products to fit in too. They will fit in as plugins appropriately. Sorry, before I go to that, it also, when we release 5.1, which was announced and will be available soon, there will be not only the new client, but there will be a SDK for extending the new client too. Okay, so this is what the thing approximately looks like. It's built at 3 levels. There's a set of backend services it exploits, and I'll talk about this when I talk about the common services. There's a Java middle tier, which does all the work, and there's your front-end UI, which is Flex running in a browser, right? I'm not going to go into all the details here, but 2 pieces that I want to draw attention to. There's 2 places you can extend it. One is you can extend it by providing new data to it, right? So that's down here, what you see as, if I wrote a new service, I would have to figure out a way to pull data into the UI for that service or do operations. So we call that a data provider. And then when you want to show any visual parts, there's a way to build extensions to the visual parts, and I'll walk through a little bit more of what you can do there. So those are the 2 places that you would extend. If you came in and added something, you might just add to the visual part, or if you've got a new service with a new domain, new data, you put a data provider that will also pull in this information. So looking at what the UI looks like a little bit, we have, these are the sort of the places where you can find and add extensions. That's where you find actions, so you can add things in there. The drop down can say, my favorite actions, whatever they are. You can add whole new section views. So if I had a new kind of host from a vendor, hardware vendor, they could add their section view here. This is related items on this side, so those can be extended too. When I add a VM now, because I've got something new that's related to VM, it can show up over there. There's an inventory navigator, which is, I believe, right now in the transition, you'll get both the familiar tree view, but also where we are going increasingly, which is to the search box here. And so the search box can also find new items. These are domain views. That's a full pane that lets you do whatever you want within a particular domain. And finally, there are, if you're familiar with vCenter, there are shortcuts that you can add shortcuts here for different applications. What I don't quite capture here, but what we intended to do with this is sort of a composite view that you might see. The idea is you may have a bunch of applications. So you've got vCenter, you've got vCenter Ops, you've got SRM, you've got vCloud. But when you get to the VM object, just as an example, when you get to the VM object, the information from all these applications can appear there, right? So it's not I have to go to that application to see stuff about it. When I'm looking at a VM, I can see you know, if I'm using SRM, what is its backup plans, what is the recovery plans. As you can see there, there's an example of vCenter ops data right there, you know, right in the summary screen. You can see actions here for vCloud and other applications there. So there's the object view that is a composite of all the applications data for that object, right? And then there's obviously other tabs in there. There's a new scheme. If you look up there, it says inventory, manage, monitor, and related objects. So things can come in there. So the idea is you're not so much looking at it. You can take an application view, and there's a way to get to an application view of things, but you get an object view that encompasses all the applications. And if you were, for example, a third party, here's just a mock-up of a company called Acme. You know, you can say, show me all the Acme hosts. It could have been a search. You can see all the hosts that have this Acme property, whatever it is. They can put their own icons in there. They can add actions here. There's some special Acme power on that could show up here, and their properties here. So this is a way that it can be extended in the ecosystem by partners too. On the consumer UI, where we are headed is that there's a set of applications already available where we haven't yet got the point of building one consumer portal, and we're not sure we're going there. But what we do want to do is provide some level of interoperability and a set of common services across these applications. So for example, you might have a few applications here. There might be something from vCenter Ops, there's something from vCloud, you know, a couple of other things, App Director. We'll take a much more loosely coupled view of it. There are different technologies. Some may HTML, some may be native Windows, some may be Flex. What we're really trying to do is to say what's important here as a first step is when I'm somewhere here and I notice a problem and I want to go remediate it, say in vCloud, I want to go from this to this, but I want to carry the context through. I don't want to log into the vCloud thing and have to navigate again to find the VM that I thought had a problem. So we're going to give you ways to provide context. We're going to find ways so that you can log in once and that in a single sign-on, once you log in, you can go to any of the applications you have permissions to. And a few other things like notifications and actions from applications showing up in one place. So, you know, you could almost think of your applications having an extra bar there that provides a set of common actions and places to receive notifications. That's where we're going with this. The next one is around APIs and automation. Again, for APIs, we're moving from product-specific APIs to a common unified framework, right? So we want to make it so that once you learn how to use one part of our API, the rest of it is not a different technology, not a different framework. So unify that. We're also looking for consistency. So we're going to model all our actions and objects in an IDL. And then from there, we will generate bindings to different languages. We'll generate CLIs. We'll generate SDKs out of it. We're using this idea of what we call an operator model. So there's a set of actions you want to perform on these objects. And so we're focusing around that. Just what are the things you want to do to a particular object. And so what you'll end up is even if you're using PowerShell or even the orchestrator, you'll see the same sort of the primary elements in there, regardless of whether it's a command line or it's a Python binding or it's PowerShell. You'll see sort of the same model all through the. And this will be extensible in the sense that there's namespaces and someone can bring a new object, model it, and insert their namespace in there, and it'll integrate across it. So just to take a look at where we're headed with that, we're going to provide, from our side, APIs for the underlying infrastructure management, and then the cloud management, which is once you've got your resources virtualized, how do you delegate it for consumption, and then a set of common services, which is the next thing I'll talk about, and we'll have APIs to that. And then finally, how do I consume these resources in terms of using them as a service or just deploying VMs? This goes over some of the things I already said. I think an important point is that we will maintain backward compatibility on our old APIs. We know there's a large ecosystem using our APIs, and we're not going to abandon that. We'll have a way for you to use the old APIs, move to the new ones, or use them in a mixed mode. Okay. So the fourth area is really a set of common services that are going to underpin all of these things that I talked about and will be available to applications and tools to use. So in addition to things like the install and the UI and the API, we'll have, this is a basic list of the services we'll have. Component manager is sort of the directory service for any time there's a new service comes in, it'll register with the component manager, say, hey, I'm here, I'm providing this kind of service, so everybody else can find it without having to know where it is. Along with it, there'll be some sort of basic health information provided with that, saying service is up, service is down, start, stop, those sorts of things. The identity service is around single sign-on, which I mentioned briefly earlier. It's about signing on once, to whichever application you go to, and then from then on managing tokens so that you don't have to ever sign on again. There'll be an authorization service, which will be a central repository of permissions on all your objects and all your applications, so you can create roles across applications. Your roles won't necessarily be one for vCenter and one for another application. The inventory service is an extensible inventory, so I can, it'll be populated initially by the vCenter objects. There'll be VMs, there'll be hosts, there'll be other objects, storage, data stores, networks. Now, every application that comes in can have their own objects. They can also extend existing objects. So if I'm, let's say, SRM, I come in and I say, here's the plan for this VM, and there'll be a way to associate that plan for the VM. And it's the underpinning of the UI. The new UI uses this to get the information to show. And it is extensible in the sense every provider can add their objects and their attributes to existing objects, but they can't change other people's objects. Stats, there'll be a common repository for all stats and metrics. License management will be common, and then a set of runtime things. A set of runtime primitives like events, logging, tasks will all be unified. So you can go to one place, you can see all your tasks. It doesn't matter where you're doing it, you can see all your tasks as long as they're integrated. We're also looking at just sort of as base platform providing things like a message queue and databases and things. So if you're writing a small, simple application, you don't have to bring in your own message queue, your own database. You can just use that as a service. So it'll look a little bit like this, just at a block level. You've got your UI pieces there, you've got API pieces, you've got your operational integration component that includes how we manage the lifecycle, some of the common services that I talked about. And then you can see each of these that was a separate application on its own becomes essentially, in effect, a domain provider or a domain manager, right? And they plug into all of these, so that's sort of the idea of giving an integrated product experience. And hopefully if you do this right, lowering your operating expenses of just running the overall infrastructure. Okay, so just a quick, these were the 4 areas that we're focusing on, lifecycle, software lifecycle management, the UI, the API, and a set of common services to develop applications on. So the next step, I'm going to talk a little bit about extensibility. You probably already caught it as I went through those. If you look at those services we talked about, each of them is being written as, here's a common framework, and then we plug our functionality into it, whether it's the lifecycle manager or the UI. And so since it's written that way, someone else can plug their service into it and operate almost as a peer in this setup and not something on the outside, right? So that's the goal there. I'm going to talk about a few pieces there in addition to this that we're going further in this idea of opening up a little bit of the guts of our system. So in vCenter, we're going to allow basically open up the entity lifecycle of entities within vCenter, since it's sort of at the core of things. So you'll be able to interpose on actions, you, a partner, you, a VMware solution, or you, even a user, if you want to write something, be able to interpose on activities and then either stop them, change them, do actions before they start, after they finish, those sorts of things, right? And so essentially, you can insert yourself as part of the workflow of common operations on entities. And we'll also make sure that any data you have as a solution have attached to an object will, and primarily we're talking about VMs here, when a VM is migrated, whether it's vMotion or relocation, we'll make sure that data shows up at the other end and gets given to you as an application at the other end, so you can understand what was happening here. I had some data associated here. I want the same policy to apply to the VM when it ends up another site. You don't have to recreate all those things. Just a quick look at what this might look like. You have the idea of these interposers. They get called, you register them, they get called when that activity is about to start. They get to say potentially yes, no, or hold on to this, that sort of thing. So, simple examples could be if I'm managing licensing or I'm managing a lease for an object, I can say don't power on this VM if it has an expired lease. So I get a check there saying, hey, there's a VM being powered on. I go check my database, the lease is expired. I come back and say don't power this on. Or it could be like, for example, with DRS, don't disable DRS if this cluster is being managed by vCloud. So those sorts of things, you get to prevent those. You also get to do things before actions, and then you get called after an action. So you can do things like, well, I just provisioned a VM, make sure it has AV scanning turned on, or something like that, right? And finally, what the capability you used to have today, maybe in a little more detail, which is you get an event saying, this action happened, right? And you can do something post that action to do whatever is needed. But the difference is we guarantee there'll be an event there. Today, some actions have and some don't. As an administrator, you get to, since we're taking something like create a VM or power on, and we're letting others interpose, and they will let you both see what's happening and potentially say, I don't want this one to interpose on activities. I don't want this solution to do that. So you can turn on and off those sorts of things. So it gives you control in there. Switching to vCloud Director, the shipping vCloud Director has some of this already. It has a way to either get notified, give you a notification of things happening so that you can go off and update some database. It also has the idea of blocking tasks. So when you get the message, you can say hold till I come back and do something for you. So that's already available in the shipping product with vCloud Director. On the storage system too, I think in Steve Herrod's keynote he mentioned this idea of vVols. So what it is sort of today you have your virtual machine activity happen to a VMDK that sits. This is the ESX server. It sort of terminates here. After this, all the storage element sees is a whole LUN and a VMFS on it, right? So it doesn't see any of the details. What we want to do is to pass that whole VMDK lifecycle down to the storage element if they are up for it. So they can do things more efficiently. Like, for example, the storage element will know this set of blocks is part of that virtual machine. So when I say replicate it, it knows which ones to replicate. It can use its own optimized processes to do that, as opposed to either doing it all for our entire LUN or us doing it externally outside of the storage system. We're also looking at ways to allow access to objects that may be blobs somewhere. So you have a gateway to a blob store from which you can access objects. So it'd be a way to extend to. And finally, on the networking side, the vShield product is going towards this idea of, and has some part of the service insertion. So the ability to insert both networking kinds of services like load balancers and also security services like AV scanning and things, so that you can put that in there, and then as part of the life cycle of certain VMs, these things would happen. So it's another way of extending the platform. Okay, so now that I've gone through this, I'm going to walk through an example of how some of this might be used. So think of, as an example, we're introducing a new service. We're just calling it DBaaS, and it's going to provide the idea that you can get a database as a service, right? And so it's a new service that's getting introduced in the system. Clearly, the installer will, DBaaS service will provide a set of components. And the installer will go ahead and it will put the UI components, UI extension components in the right place. It'll put API components in the right place. And it'll bring in the domain server, whatever is doing this database management piece, right? It will register with the component manager and say, hey, I'm this database as a service, and if anyone needs a database, funnel it towards me. It will connect up with the identity manager. It gets itself an identity as the service, and from then on it can do things using that identity. And it also signs up to take the tokens. Should someone else have logged in somewhere and has produced a token, it has a way to take the tokens, authenticate them, and not require further authentication. Similarly, take its permissions and stick it, in the authorization service, so you can see, maybe create DB permissions you can give somebody, or someone can have a power on or power off. It will extend the inventory service, so it'll probably create a new DB object and may associate it with a VM object, because my DBs are VMs, and so you can find that association. It'll start feeding stats into the stats service, maybe how much the DB is being used, I/O, those sorts of things. Licensing if it needs to manage, and then as it's operating, it can generate events, logs, and tasks to the appropriate services. So now we look at a user coming in to use this, just to go through the flow. So a user comes in and logs in here. So what happens? It's coming into the tenant. The user's coming to the tenant UI. There's an auth request going to the authentication API endpoint, which feeds it to the authentication service, right? The authentication service says, okay, I accept your username, password. I've generated a token, and it starts handing that token out. It also generates, it tells the audit event service that so-and-so logged in, so we've got a trace of that. Okay, so now the user's logged in, and they get to see a screen. You can see now there's, those are sort of vCloud, your vApp entity there, and you can see a database entity there. So how does it do that, right? So in the tenant UI or the admin UI, you've got the renderer for the the vApp, and you've got the renderer for the database, right? And the tenant goes, when it hits that screen, it goes to the inventory service endpoint to the inventory service and says, I want all the objects that this user can see in this context. And the inventory service will check its database for the objects, also check with the authorization service to see what objects this user can see, and feed those back to the UI where it's rendered by the appropriate renderers in the single pane. Okay, so now we're in there, we see our stuff, we want to say, how about we clone a database? So that's that action, so that it's been extended, the actions have been extended with the clone database action there. So it's going to do a clone of the database. So now, to do the clone database, the UI is going to talk to the DBaaS service handler in the API to the DBaaS server, right? And the DBaaS server is going to create a task to clone the database. It knows how to do that, right? It's going to ask for a VM, and it's going to take a template that's a database and do all of that stuff. But that's its domain-specific functionality, and the rest of the platform doesn't need to know anything about that other than the DBaaS server handles those things, right? But it will go ahead and tell the task, it will check with the authorization service to see if you have the capability to clone a database, and assuming you do, it'll tell the task service, hey, I'm starting a task to clone a database, keep track of it, and it'll also tell the audit service that I'm cloning a database for so-and-so. Okay, so that now it comes back here, and that's the database that's being created, and you've got this little spinning circle. What's happening here is the UI is going through the task service handler to the task service to keep getting updates on, is this task done? Is it 25%? Is it 50%? And now now we are at the point where we've now got the second database. We can be at the UI, and we can see some information about the database that was just created. And for that, what is happening is the UI is going out to the DBaaS handler, along with the other inventory service stuff that it did before. but it's going to the DBaaS handler, which is going to the DBaaS server, which is consulting the inventory service to say, what are the database objects that this person has and the additional attributes that it showed there. So it's going to get all of that from the inventory service because it had updated that when it finished the task. And in addition, it can combine some of its own private data and show it to the client. Whoa, sorry. Okay, so that gives you an idea of how these pieces can cooperate to provide an integrated experience, and also how what we wanted to do, which is how to give you a platform to add new services and have them also integrate fairly seamlessly into it. Our hope is, overall with these two pieces, us bringing our applications together into a suite, and our ecosystem being able to integrate into it, we're going to give the user an overall much, much better experience than they get today. I'll just finish with this slide. We've been fairly focused on this piece here. This is the part that everyone sees. It's the features that everyone sees in each of these products. But really, there's a lot of work that happens in the background and a lot of infrastructure that's needed to make sure it goes all the way there and comes back safely. That's my talk. I'm happy to take questions. If you have questions, please walk up to one of the mics and ask so that everyone can hear the questions. Okay, thank you. I hope you have a good rest of VMworld.